state-imposed curfew.
That the scene on the ground in Ferguson, Missouri last night, where at least 7 people were arrested for disobeying a state-imposed curfew from midnight to 5 a.m. Missouri Governor Jay Nixon also declared a state of emergency. Once again, the protests got out of hand, leading highway patrol officers to fire tear gas into the crowd. Protesters calling for the arrest of Officer Darren Wilson, a 6-year veteran of the Ferguson police force who was accused of shooting and killing Michael Brown. The rioting across the city began just over a week ago. Local police officers dressed in riot gear used tear gas and rubber bullets to break up evening protests. The police response was highly criticized. Governor Nixon later announced that highway patrol officers would take over security. The move was supposed to help quell the violence, and it did Thursday night. But the violence returned Friday and continued this weekend. Now security getting another boost. Today, the National Guard moved in. The situation in Ferguson has raised many discussions about the over-militarization of the police. Former New York City Police Commissioner Bernie Kerik backing up the police response.
There were Molotov cocktails thrown. There was personal and property that was damaged. The police have to respond to that. You can't let the thugs take over the city. We saw that the other day. The police had to respond. Were they heavy-handed? I wasn't there. I don't know. Some of the weapons I saw I don't think were needed. And then again last night we had the flare-up. The police can't be afraid to do their job, shouldn't be afraid to do their job, you know, and we have to get away from this political correctness. You know, peaceful demonstration should be peaceful. The police can do their job, but when the thugs try to take over the community, the police have to act and do whatever they have to do to keep the peace.
This conversation reached the White House today. President Obama touched on how Ferguson is being policed when he spoke this afternoon.
I think it's probably useful for us to review how the funding has gone, how local law enforcement has used grant dollars to make sure that what they're purchasing is stuff that they actually need, because you know, there is a big difference between our military and our local law enforcement, and we don't want those lines blurred. That would be contrary to our traditions.
Obviously, much of the response from the community in Ferguson is based on specific events and the relationship that the community in Ferguson has with the police department. I want to start with the over-militarization argument, though. How much credence do you give to the notion that police sort of inflamed the situation on the ground there by rolling in tanks, rolling in paramilitary gear, you know, rolling in these armored vehicles that looked like they came from Fallujah?
Two things. The way you start something will determine how you go through it. And the clip on Commissioner Kerik is a classic example of an authority figure acting as a leader and not leaders in positions of authority.
How do you mean?
I mean, people in authority dominate, dictate, manipulate, intimidate. Leaders lead by example. And when you have this aggressive response, you're going to get a response back to that. Now, there is never any justification or there's never any excuse for breaking the law for the aspect. So individuals that damage property and these things have to be held accountable. I was in the McDuffie riots, deep in them, in 1980 in Miami, Florida. It is a pack mentality, and individuals get caught up. People are in there for many reasons. A lot of people not even in there because of Michael Brown, but they're in there because, leadership has to diffuse that situation and lead the people out of that situation, to take their focus off of this mentality. What you saw at the police department is clearly a novice leadership in handling public policy and this kind of situation.
What you saw was what I call, there's no other way to put this, Barney Fife Police Department. Yes. We will overpower them. They won't take our streets. Go get the tank, get the police dogs. The worst thing that you can do with a community of color is pull out the police dogs, which happened, I believe, the first night. It sends, given Bull Connor and the history of this country as far as law enforcement, it sends the wrong message. What the governor, and the governor wasn't involved on day one, but what he should have done was call those 3 black police officers in immediately and ask them for advice. They should have got Ron Johnson, the state police commander, on. I contend if he had been there a day earlier, we might not have seen the violence that we saw.
And it almost worked. It almost worked with the cessation of violence Thursday night. It seemed like things were close to a resolution, and then, you know, you had the release of the video of Michael Brown in the convenience store, and things heated up again over the weekend. So how do you handle a situation where you need the police to protect lives and property and keep the peace?
It's very important for the police to understand that there is a direct relationship between their capacity to protect lives and property and the preceding activities and relationships that they establish before the event occurs. That is so important that we don't miss in this. If the police department had developed relationships with the community, we'd have a different kind of outcome. And that's always with any police department. Police department can't show up and do what they want or supposed to do at the time of the situation. They got to show up before and build relationships in community and build trust so that they, and have inclusion of the community in the police department. The problem in Ferguson is the problem of exclusion and no relationships prior to this incident. I do not believe that it's just the incidents that struck this. I believe this is a symbiotic of a bigger problem of being left out, of having no contact, or not engaging people prior to that. And any police department, okay, what it is, whether it's New York City, anyway, whenever you leave people out, when you don't build relationships, you don't build bridges, and you don't build trust before the event comes, it's too late.
Well, one of the other things is that whenever you can take this and it plays out all across the United States, and when you look at an individual that gets killed by the police, generally the municipality, the mayor comes out and says that they have the best police department in the world, and then they talk about the awards the officers has won, and they automatically start combing through that person's history, hoping to find some evidence of a criminal record.
The suspect's history.
A suspect, the victim's history, who's dead, whether it's Amadou Diallo, as we were talking about before, or it's you name it, Mr. Garner. They hope that there's something in that person's background that makes us forget that there still has to be a basis to shoot the person. As we said before, look, you could be Charlie Manson. If you're not committing a crime right now, you don't deserve to be gunned down. On the other hand, you could be a really great person, and if you are engaged in certain conduct, you may justify the police officers in shooting you. But one of the bigger issues to me is the fact that police operate under the belief that they're going to be protected by the government no matter what, that when a lawsuit is filed, generally it's the people from the town that pay anything that's any settlement or any verdict, not the officers directly. It's extremely unlikely that they're going to be prosecuted. And generally you have statements made by mayors and by prosecutors that the shooting is justified before there's even an investigation. You can see it here in White Plains with the Chamberlain case.
And that's exactly what's happening in Ferguson. Go ahead, Pastor.
A great point. The great challenge of our system is that the most powerful person in the system is the prosecutor. And prosecutors determine the outcomes of cases like this. And unfortunately, in most instances, there is no line of separation between the police department and the prosecutor's office.
Well, toward that end, we've been calling for independent prosecutions on all police-related shootings. And again, I believe that clearly it's a benefit to the prosecution because the district attorney's office and the DA is a politician 99% of the time. Sometimes they're appointed, but most likely a politician who's going to run for re-election. Those makes it their job much more difficult.
We're looking live in Ferguson right now as the situation begins to move from daylight into the nighttime. Pastor, you were going to say?
Based on what Mayor and Dr. Franklin said, all the more reason that we should expect nothing less than sound judgment and the utmost in professionalism. The police department is the arm of the government to enforce the law. All laws are written generically, and they're not based on any profiling for those issues of race, creed, color from that aspect. A police officer has tremendous power, more power than the President of the United States when you deal with him one-to-one. He has the power to stop your freedom and can ultimately take your life, as we've seen over the years. With that kind of power, there's no room for mistakes. And we should expect and we should insist that so these things don't keep happening over and over again. It's not, and I think this problem runs a lot deeper than anybody wants to deal with. It has to do with the perception of races, how one race perceives another race, and if one race is, as President Obama said, coming to it with fear, they will not even fall back on one specific part of training, which is self-defense and using their weapons, and not their what we call wisdom, the application of the knowledge that they have that bring the situation down.
Let me build on his point and say it real succinctly. What we have going on in many police situations is anger and racism. Anger in terms of so many people are afraid of big black men. Many policemen. They don't know, they're not trained to deal with black people. They're not they automatically make some assumptions about African Americans, African American males. They make assumptions, just like in the Garner. You can't tell me that if he was a white man, that he'd be treated the same way. I just know that we got to do some more training and sensitizing in terms of our police department and preparing them to deal with the multi-ethnic landscape that they deal with.
Is the solution for a larger African-American police makeup of the police force, or is there a training that can be done to get there?
That's a quick fix. That's a quick fix. It's a societal problem. You want to blame the media, you want to blame Hollywood, you want to blame perceptions, rap, whatever it is. People are looking at certain segments of society, black men, big men, as dangerous.
That's exactly right.
Dangerous, and for whatever reason. So if you want, and that perception, and that takes years, and the only way that happens is getting to know who I am. Having said that, I know wonderful police. I've written many letters to Ray Kelly and to Commissioner Bratton for the 103rd Precinct, where I am actively involved, and many of my pastors, Bishop Lester Williams and Bishop Erskine Williams, and all of us, we're on the community council, and we meet every month with our police, and we speak to them, and they understand, and we don't have, I don't want to say completely, but we don't have that issue because we're involved with that, and we're trying to bring that to the point.
But see, here's where it gets complicated, and I'm gonna go ahead and put it out there, gentlemen. Here's where it gets complicated. The pastors are so right. There's a lot of racism that goes on. Let's be honest. If the police stop me and they stop you, I'm going to be treated completely different than the way you're going to be treated. You will be treated with respect. I will be talked down to, told what I'm going to do, and I'm lucky if I even see a badge, if they don't have a uniform on. And God forbid, I better not ask for a badge number or their name, because that's a crime for a black man. Wait, let me just finish. Okay. But now here's where the problem comes in. Black men committing crime. So police look at all of us as criminals. 9 times out of 10, they're responding to calls where crimes have been committed or alleged crimes by black males. And then they brush us, including my son, who at age 16 had never did anything to a police officer in his life, was told spread eagle and get on the floor with a cop pulling his gun out. That's an initiation for black young males.
The only thing I would say about that, though, is that you have communities that are predominantly white and crime occurs there.
Of course,
and it occurs
but
at
that's
the same,
where the racism comes in.
Well, exactly. That's where the racism may come in, because if you go to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, where it's one of the poorest parts of this country and crime is rampant, you don't have a lot of white males getting shot and killed by the police. Mm-hmm. So there is definitely a component of accountability for the community, whether it's black, white, or other. We all have a responsibility to conduct ourselves a particular way, in a reasonable, respectful way. But the police typically don't get a chance to know the people in the community. That's community policing. We've been led to believe community policing is something else, that it's basically you having people stopped for smoking marijuana or for having an open container of alcohol.
But we've also seen lots.
Dangerous here is everything we just said. I don't believe is being done in malice. It's being done from a mindset that this is how life is. And that's even more dangerous, because now this is my right to do this. It's not even a malicious thing.
I have to take a break here. When we come back, the forces at play in Ferguson are by no means confined to Ferguson. As the debate here continues, following the death of Eric Garner, and the value of police approaches like broken windows and stop and frisk continues, we look back at a bloody and shooting-filled weekend in the city. Exactly the outcome that supporters of those police techniques feared would come if those policies were reversed. We're going to get into that next on RFL.